In the small and peaceful town of Nakuru, the sound of laughter often came from the home of two young women, Adana and Lerato. They had grown up together since childhood, playing in the dusty streets, sharing mangoes under the big tree near the market, and helping each other with school lessons. Their friendship was the kind that people admired, strong, loyal, and full of love. Everyone in town knew that where you saw one, you would always find the other close behind. Adana was lively and full of dreams. She had a loud laugh that could fill a whole room. Lerato, on the other hand, was gentle and calm. Her voice was soft and she always spoke kindly to everyone. The two girls balanced each other like sunshine and shade. They shared secrets, dreams, and hopes for the future. Sometimes they would sit by the river in the evening and talk about what kind of lives they wanted. Lerato always said she wished for a small home, a loving husband, and children who would laugh around her. Adana, smiling brightly, said she wanted adventure, to see new places, meet new people, and live freely. As they grew older, their paths began to change. One day, a man named Kwame came to Nakuru. He was tall, gentle, and hard-working. He worked at the town's grain store and often helped the elders with heavy sacks. He was polite, humble, and carried a quiet strength that drew people to him. Lerato met him one sunny afternoon at the market when she dropped her basket of fruit. Kwame helped her pick them up, and that simple act began something beautiful. Soon, everyone in Nakuru began to notice how Kwame and Lerato smiled at each other when they met. Adana teased Lerato about it, laughing and saying, "Ah, so this is why you've been smiling at the river every evening." Lerato would blush and shake her head, pretending not to care, but her eyes gave her away. Months passed and their friendship turned into love. Kwame came to Lerato's home with his family and asked for her hand in marriage. Adana was the happiest person in the room. She helped her best friend prepare for the wedding, choosing dresses, decorating the small hall, and even helping cook the food. She wanted everything to be perfect for Lerato. On the day of the wedding, the whole town gathered. Music played, children danced, and laughter filled the air. Lerato looked beautiful in her white dress and Kwame couldn't take his eyes off her. Adana stood beside her as maid of honor, smiling so wide that her cheeks hurt. She clapped, she danced, and she laughed as if the joy belonged to her too. When Lerato said, "I do," Adana's eyes filled with happy tears. But somewhere deep in her heart, a small, quiet ache started to grow. It was not jealousy, not the kind that wishes bad for others, but a soft sadness. She had always dreamed of finding someone who would look at her the way Kwame looked at Lerato. She wanted a love that was gentle, sure, and real. As she watched her best friend begin her new life, she felt happy, yet somehow alone. After the wedding, life continued peacefully. Lerato moved into Kwame's small but lovely home near the edge of town. The house had a small garden where she planted flowers and vegetables. Adana visited often, bringing laughter and stories. She played with the little girl from next door and helped Lerato with cooking. Kwame was always kind to her, treating her like a sister. Sometimes when Adana watched them together, she admired their love. Kwame always listened to Lerato with care, and Lerato's face always lit up when she saw him. They made everything seem simple, like love was easy and life was gentle. But when Adana went home at night, the silence of her small house felt heavy. She would sit by the window, staring at the stars, and whisper to herself, "Maybe one day I will find someone who looks at me that way." One Sunday afternoon, while sitting under the big tree near the river, Lerato told Adana she was expecting a baby. Adana screamed with excitement and hugged her tightly. "You will be such a good mother," she said, smiling brightly. "That child will be lucky to have you." When Lerato gave birth to a beautiful baby girl named Zina, Adana was there, holding her friend's hand and crying tears of joy. She became like an aunt to the baby, visiting every week, bringing small gifts and singing songs to make the baby laugh. The little girl soon began to recognize her and would stretch her tiny hands toward Adana whenever she came. Life seemed perfect for a long time. The three of them, Lerato, Kwame, and Adana, often shared meals and laughter. The town admired their friendship and love. People would say, "Those three are like family." Adana felt proud of that, proud to be part of something so warm. But as the years passed, things began to change. Adana grew older and lonelier. Most of her friends had married, and she found herself attending weddings again and again, clapping for others but never for herself. She still smiled, still laughed, but her heart sometimes felt empty. She didn't say anything to Lerato because she didn't want to burden her with sadness. Sometimes when Lerato and Kwame held hands or shared a quiet look, Adana would look away. She didn't want to feel the small sting that came with it. She reminded herself that Lerato was her best friend and that her happiness should be enough. One evening, the three of them sat outside watching the sunset. Zena was playing with her doll, and the orange light of the setting sun painted the sky. Lorato turned to Adana and said softly, "You will find your person too, my friend. Don't lose hope. Love comes when you least expect it." Adana smiled and nodded. "Maybe," she said. But deep inside she wondered if that was true. The days continued, calm and peaceful. Adana kept herself busy with work, helping neighbors and spending time with Zena. She told herself she was content, that friendship was enough. Yet, when she lay in bed at night, she felt a strange emptiness that even love from friends couldn't fill. She dreamed sometimes, dreams of a home of her own, laughter that belonged only to her, and a man who would listen to her stories. She imagined someone looking at her with warmth and saying, "You are enough." But when she woke up, the dreams faded like mist, leaving her heart heavy. Still, she smiled every day. She helped Lorato and stood by her through everything. Because no matter how she felt inside, her friendship was real. Her love for Lorato was true. But deep in her soul, she didn't know that life was quietly preparing to test that love, in ways she could never imagine. Sometimes, fate begins its story long before we notice. And for Adana, the story that would change everything had already begun the moment she wished for love like Lorato's. That wish, soft, secret, and innocent, would one day become the path she would regret walking. After many calm and happy years in Nakuru, life changed in a way that no one expected. The sun still rose each morning and the birds still sang, but the warmth that once filled Kwame and Lorato's home began to fade when Lorato fell ill. It started as a small cough, something she said would pass. But soon her laughter grew weaker and her steps became slow. Everyone in the town prayed for her recovery, and Adana never left her side. Adana spent every day at Lorato's home, helping her sit up, cooking soft meals and singing old songs to make her smile. Sometimes when Lorato was too weak to speak, she would just hold Adana's hand and whisper, "Thank you, my sister." Her eyes, once bright with joy, now carried a quiet sadness. Adana would wipe away her tears and whisper, "You'll be fine, my friend. You'll get better soon." But deep in her heart, she feared the truth. Kwame tried everything he could. He brought medicine from the town clinic, called healers, and even prayed at the small church every evening. Zena, still small and innocent, would climb onto her mother's bed, playing with her hair and asking, "Mama, when will you come outside again?" Lorato would smile softly and say, "Soon, my little one." But that soon never came. One cold morning the air felt heavy. The birds were silent. Adana arrived early to help prepare breakfast, but when she stepped inside she saw Kwame sitting by Lorato's bed, holding her still hand. There was no sound, no movement, only quiet tears falling onto her lifeless fingers. Lorato was gone. The news spread through Nakuru like wind through dry leaves. The whole town came to mourn. People brought flowers, food, and songs of comfort. The church was full that day. Adana stood beside Kwame and Zena, her eyes swollen from crying. She couldn't believe her best friend was gone, the same girl she had played with under the mango tree, the one who had laughed beside her during the wedding, the one who had called her sister. It felt like a part of her soul had been taken away. For weeks the house felt empty. The laughter that once filled it had vanished. Kwame spoke little, lost in his pain, and Zena often cried herself to sleep. Adana visited every day. She cooked for them, swept the floor, and helped Zena with her hair. She wanted to make the house feel alive again, even just a little. She didn't do it because she had to. She did it because she loved Lorato's family like her own. At first Kwame barely spoke. He sat outside every evening, staring at the sky where the sun disappeared. But Adana stayed close. She would bring him tea, sit quietly beside him, and talk about Lorato. She loved these sunsets, she would say softly. She used to say the orange sky reminded her of home. Kwame would nod, his eyes distant, and whisper, "Yes, she did." As months passed, the pain began to ease little by little. The sound of Zena's laughter slowly returned to the house. She would run to Adana when she came, hugging her tightly and saying, "Auntie Ada." Adana loved the child deeply. She helped her with schoolwork, told her bedtime stories, and made sure she never felt alone. One day, while Adana and Kwame were preparing dinner, Zena came running in, laughing, holding a flower she had picked. She placed it in Adana's hair and said, "You look like Mama." The words made Adana freeze. She smiled softly, hiding the sudden sting in her heart. Kwame looked at her for a long moment, his eyes filled with something new, a gentle warmth, a quiet gratitude. Over time that look became familiar. It wasn't rushed or loud. It was slow, careful, like the first sunrise after a long night. Kwame began to speak more. They would sit outside after dinner talking about life, the past, and the future. He told her stories about his childhood, and she told him how Lorato and she once dreamed of opening a small shop together. Their conversations brought peace to both hearts that had been broken. One evening, as rain softly fell, they sat together under the porch roof. The air was cool and the sound of water on the leaves filled the silence. Kwame looked at Adana and said quietly, "You bring light back into this house." Adana didn't know what to say. Her heart beat fast and she looked down, afraid of what she felt. Days turned into weeks and soon their bond grew deeper. Kwame began to smile again and Adana felt something stir in her heart, something she had not felt in years. But each time she smiled, a small voice in her heart whispered, this was Lorato's home. She pushed the thought away, telling herself that love could also heal pain, that maybe this was what fate wanted. Then one afternoon, as the sun painted the sky gold, Kwame called her outside. He looked nervous, holding a small wooden box in his hands. Adana stood still, feeling her chest tighten. "Adana," he began softly, "you have done so much for me and for Zina. You brought back laughter when we had forgotten how to smile. You cared for us when we had nothing but pain. I know this may surprise you, but I cannot imagine life without you." Her heart began to race. He opened the small box, revealing a simple silver ring. "Will you marry me?" he asked gently. The world felt quiet for a long moment. The wind stopped and even the birds seemed to listen. Adana's eyes filled with tears. She thought of Lorato, of their childhood, of the wedding day, of her last words. But she also thought of Zina's smile, of Kwame's kindness, of the peace that had slowly returned to the home. She took a deep breath, trying to silence the storm inside her, and said softly, "Yes." The town was surprised when they heard the news. Some people whispered, some smiled, and others said nothing. But everyone came to the small ceremony. Adana wore a light blue dress, not white. She said white belonged to Lorato's memory. Kwame held her hand gently, his eyes full of hope. Zina laughed and clapped her hands, calling her Mama Ada. The ceremony was quiet but beautiful. As Adana said her vows, her voice trembled. She told herself that this was love, a second chance, a new beginning. She believed that by loving Kwame and caring for Zina, she could honor Lorato's memory. She wanted to believe that love could heal every wound. But as the day ended and the sun disappeared behind the hills, Adana felt a strange heaviness in her heart. She looked at the small home, once filled with Lorato's laughter, and wondered if she had made the right choice. That night, when everyone had gone to bed, she sat outside alone watching the stars. The ring on her finger shone faintly in the moonlight. She whispered into the quiet air, "I hope you understand, Lorato. I only wanted to help. I only wanted love." The wind rustled through the trees, gentle but cold. It almost sounded like a sigh. Adana pulled her shawl tighter and looked up at the dark sky. For the first time she felt that love, the one she had longed for, might not be as simple or as healing as she had once believed. And though she didn't yet know it, that night was only the beginning of her regret. At first, everything seemed perfect, or at least that's what Adana told herself each morning. The house in Nakuru, once quiet with sorrow, was now alive again with laughter. Zina, who had once cried herself to sleep, now ran through the small garden, singing songs and chasing butterflies. Her laughter filled every corner of the home, and it warmed Adana's heart to see the child so happy again. Kwame too seemed lighter. He smiled more, worked hard, and came home early to eat dinner with his family. He would sit with Adana and Zina at the table, sharing stories from work, and sometimes they would all laugh until tears came. The neighbors who once whispered about Adana's marriage now smiled when they passed by the gate. To them, the family looked whole again. A man, his wife, and his little girl living in peace. Adana often thought, maybe I made the right choice. She had found purpose again. She cooked, cared for Zina, and managed the home with love. Every evening, she would light a candle by the window and whisper a quiet prayer for Lorato's spirit, promising to care for her husband and daughter. She believed Lorato would have wanted that. But as the days went by, small things began to change. It started with simple words, things Kwame said without thinking. One evening, as Adana served him dinner, he smiled faintly and said, "Ah, Lorato used to make this stew with a bit more pepper." He didn't mean it harshly. His tone was soft, almost nostalgic. But the words stung Adana like a thorn. She laughed weakly and said, "I'll remember that next time," though her heart felt heavy. At first, she told herself it was normal. After all, Lorato had been part of his life for many years. It was only natural that he missed her. But as time passed, it happened again and again. He would say things like, "Lorato loved that flower," or, Lorato used to sing to Zina at night. He spoke of his late wife often, not with tears, but with a warmth that made Adana feel like she was only borrowing the space Lorato once filled. One morning Adana found an old photo on the shelf, a picture of Kwame, Lorato and baby Zina, smiling by the river. The frame was slightly dusty. She hesitated before wiping it clean, unsure whether to keep it there or put it away. When Kwame saw her holding it, he smiled and said softly, "That was one of the happiest days of my life." He didn't mean to hurt her, but Adana's heart tightened. She placed the frame back carefully and forced a smile. "It's a beautiful photo," she said quietly. At night, when Kwame fell asleep, she would lie awake beside him, staring at the ceiling. Sometimes he whispered Lorato's name in his dreams. The first time she heard it, she froze. Her heart sank and she pulled the blanket closer. She wanted to wake him to ask what he dreamed of, but she couldn't. She just turned away, her eyes filling with tears that fell silently onto her pillow. Days turned into weeks and that quiet pain grew. She began to notice small things, the way Kwame's eyes sometimes drifted when he looked at her, as if he was searching for something that wasn't there. The way he smiled at her, soft but distant, like a memory he couldn't quite touch. When they walked through the market, people would greet them kindly. "Good morning, Mr. and Mrs. Kwame," they'd say. Adana smiled politely, but inside she wondered if they too saw it, the emptiness that sometimes passed between them. Zina loved Adana dearly. She called her Mama Ada, and followed her everywhere. They cooked together, read stories and laughed as they picked flowers for the small garden. But sometimes, when Zina asked innocent questions like, "Do you remember when Mama Lorato took me to the river?" Adana's heart would ache. She smiled and said, "Tell me about it," but deep inside she felt like a guest in another woman's story. One evening as the sun dipped behind the hills, Adana and Kwame sat outside watching Zina play. The orange light bathed the world in gold. Kwame sighed softly and said, "Lorato loved this time of day. She always said the sunset reminded her of hope." Adana froze for a moment before nodding. "It is beautiful," she replied, her voice quiet. He didn't notice the sadness in her tone. He simply smiled and continued to watch the horizon. Later that night, as Adana washed the dishes, she looked at her reflection in the window. The woman staring back looked tired, her smile faint. She whispered to herself, "Am I living my life, or hers?" She tried to shake off the feeling. She told herself that marriage was about patience and love, that she had to give him time. After all, he had lost someone he truly loved. But as months passed, that patience began to feel like a burden. Sometimes she caught herself imitating Lorato without meaning to, cooking food the way Kwame liked, wearing the same perfume Lorato once used, even singing Zina the same lullaby she remembered Lorato humming. It was as if she was slowly becoming a shadow of her late friend. One afternoon, as she was arranging flowers in a vase, Kwame entered the room and smiled. "You remind me so much of her," he said softly. The words, though gentle, pierced through her heart. She forced a smile and said, "Maybe that's why you chose me." He chuckled lightly, not realizing how deeply those words hurt her. When he left the room, Adana's smile faded. She stared at the flowers in her hands and whispered, "But who am I now?" The loneliness that followed was quiet but constant. She no longer felt like herself. Every corner of the house carried Lorato's memory, the photos on the walls, the garden Lorato planted, even the old blanket Zina refused to replace. Adana loved them all, but each reminded her that she was only filling the space of someone else. One evening she went to the river alone. The same river where she and Lorato had once laughed as children. The same river where Lorato and Kwame had taken their wedding photos. She sat on a rock, watching the water flow, and tears filled her eyes. "Why does love feel so heavy?" she whispered. The wind rustled the trees, but there was no answer. When she returned home, Kwame was sitting on the porch. "You were gone for a while," he said gently. "I went to think," she replied. He looked at her for a moment and said softly, "Lorato used to go there when she needed peace too." Adana smiled weakly. "I know," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. That night, as she lay in bed, she turned away from him and stared at the dark wall. She realized something painful. She had wanted love so badly that she had walked into someone else's story, someone else's memories. Kwame cared for her, yes. But in his eyes she saw the ghost of Lorato, the woman he had truly loved, the woman whose laughter still lingered in the house. Adana closed her eyes and whispered into the dark, "I wanted to bring light here, but I think I've lost my own." Outside, the wind blew softly through the trees, carrying with it the echo of a name, one that would never truly leave their home. It was a quiet afternoon in Nakuru. The sun was gentle and the breeze moved softly through the curtains. Adana was cleaning the shelves in the living room when she found an old wooden box tucked behind a stack of books. It was dusty and worn, the corners faded with time. She recognized it at once. It was Lorato's. Her heart skipped a beat. She sat down slowly on the floor, her hands trembling as she opened the box. Inside were a few old letters, dried flowers, and a small leather-bound journal. The sight of it made her chest tighten. Lorato had always loved to write. She used to sit by the river, pen in hand, writing poems and dreams in her little books. Adana hesitated for a moment before touching it. She whispered softly, "Forgive me, my friend," and then opened the first page. The handwriting was neat and flowing, just as she remembered. On the first page Lorato had written, "For my heart's peace, I write what I cannot say." Adana turned the pages carefully, reading slowly. Each word felt like a whisper from the past. Lorato had written about her days with Kwame, about her love for her family, and about her friendship with Adana. "Adana is my sister in spirit," one entry said. "She understands me even when I cannot speak. I pray she always finds happiness, no matter where life takes her." Adana's eyes filled with tears. She kept reading, her heart aching more with every line. Lorato had written about her illness too, about her fear of leaving Zina behind, and about her hope that Kwame would stay strong. On one page, the words were shakier, as if Lorato had written them in pain. "If anything happens to me, I hope Adana stays close. She has a pure heart. I trust her to look after my family. She will keep them safe, I know she will." Adana pressed her hand to her mouth, trying not to cry aloud. The weight of those words was too much. Lorato hadn't just trusted her, she had loved her deeply, like a sister. And now, Adana realized she had taken that trust and turned it into something that haunted her every day. She kept reading, and then she reached a page near the end. The words there were written in darker ink, the letters hurried. "Sometimes I worry about Adana. She feels lonely even when surrounded by love. I wish she could see how bright her heart is. I hope she never forgets how much she is loved." Adana stopped reading. Her tears fell freely now, dropping onto the old pages. She closed the journal and held it against her chest. The pain in her heart was sharp and deep. She felt like she could hear Lorato's voice whispering through those words, kind, gentle, full of love. And suddenly everything became clear. She wasn't living in Lorato's home because of love. She wasn't married to Kwame because of fate. She had done it because she was lonely, because she had wanted to fill an empty space in her heart. But in doing so, she had taken the place of someone who could never be replaced. That night the house felt different. The air was heavy, as though the walls themselves carried the weight of the past. Adana sat quietly by the table, Lorato's journal open beside her. The candlelight flickered over the pages. She could hear Zina's soft breathing from the other room and the sound of Kwame washing up outside. When he came in, he looked tired. He smiled gently, sitting across from her. "You're quiet tonight," he said softly. Adana looked up at him, her eyes red from crying. She took a deep breath before speaking. "Kwame," she said slowly, her voice trembling, "I found Lorato's journal." He froze. His hands stopped moving. "Her journal?" he repeated, his voice low. Adana nodded and turned the book toward him. "She wrote about you, about Zina, about me." Kwame looked down at the open pages but didn't touch them. His eyes softened with memory. "She loved writing," he whispered. "She did," Adana said quietly. She hesitated before continuing, "Kwame, she loved us both in her own way. She trusted me to take care of you. But I don't think she ever wanted me to replace her." The words hung in the air, heavy and true. Kwame looked at her for a long moment. His face showed pain, confusion, and understanding all at once. "Adana," he began, but she shook her head gently. "No," she said softly. "Let me say it. When we married, I told myself we were healing together. But that's not true. I was lonely, Kwame. You were grieving. We both tried to fix our hearts by building something from the past. But the truth is," her voice broke, "we both married our sadness, not each other." The room fell silent. Only the soft sound of the wind came through the open window. Kwame looked down, his eyes full of sorrow. He didn't speak, but his silence said everything. He knew she was right. Adana continued, her voice quiet but steady. "I wanted to believe I was doing the right thing. I thought I could fill the emptiness for you, for Zina, and for myself. But now I see that I've only made the ghost of Lorato stronger in this house. She's everywhere, in your memories, in your words, even in the way Zina smiles. And I can't fight that. I shouldn't." Kwame's eyes glistened. "I never wanted to hurt you," he said softly. "You have been nothing but kind. I miss her every day. Sometimes I think I see her in you, and I don't know if that brings me peace or pain. Adana smiled sadly. It brings me pain, she whispered. Because it means I'll never be seen for who I truly am. For a long time neither of them spoke. They just sat there in silence, two souls joined by love, loss, and guilt. The candle burned lower and its small flame flickered, casting shadows on the walls. Finally, Adana stood and walked to the window. The night outside was calm, the stars soft and far away. She took a deep breath and said quietly, "Maybe what we need isn't each other. Maybe what we need is peace." Kwame rose slowly and came to stand beside her. He didn't touch her. He just looked out at the same stars and said, "Perhaps you're right." They stood there for a while listening to the night. The sound of Zena's gentle breathing came from her room, innocent, peaceful, unaware of the storm that had passed through her home. Adana turned to Kwame and said softly, "I'll always care for you and for Zena. But I think I need to find myself again. I need to remember who I was before all of this." He nodded, his expression full of quiet sadness. "You deserve that," he said simply. Adana closed Lorato's journal and held it close one last time. She whispered, "Thank you, my sister," before placing it carefully back in the box. That night, when she lay down to sleep, she didn't cry. Her heart still hurt, but there was something new inside her, a calm acceptance. She knew now that love wasn't always meant to heal what was broken. Sometimes it was meant to show you what needed to change. And as the moonlight spilled across the floor, Adana whispered into the darkness, "Tomorrow I will begin again." In the stillness of the night, it almost felt like Lorato's spirit was there, watching over her, forgiving her, and reminding her that true love was never meant to be taken. It was meant to be remembered. The first light of dawn crept gently over Nakuru, painting the small houses and dusty streets with gold. Adana woke early, the cool morning air brushing against her skin through the open window. The world was quiet except for the faint sounds of birds greeting the day. She sat on the edge of the bed for a long moment, her heart heavy yet calm. Last night had been full of thought, full of decisions, and finally full of clarity. She knew what she had to do. Adana began packing her small bag. She carefully folded her clothes, placing each item in neat piles. She put in the few belongings she had brought with her, a simple dress, a small scarf, and a worn notebook that she had kept close through the years. She held each thing for a moment, memories of laughter, sadness, and quiet evenings washing over her like a gentle river. Each memory was a reminder of the journey she had walked, the joy of being close to Zena, the love she had felt for Kwame, and the sorrow that had come from living in the shadow of Lorato's memory. She paused when she saw Zena's drawings pinned to the wall, bright colors, scribbled shapes, a small sun smiling down at a little house. Adana smiled faintly. She knelt down and touched them lightly, remembering the little girl's laughter, her tiny hands always reaching for hers, and the warmth she had brought to every room. Zena had grown attached to her, and it made leaving even harder. Yet, she knew that by leaving she was not abandoning love, she was choosing a different kind of respect for the life that had come before her. Kwame appeared at the doorway, rubbing his eyes, looking tired yet steady. He had stayed up late the night before, sitting silently with his thoughts. When he saw Adana packing, he did not speak at first. He simply watched, as though waiting for her to explain what she already knew she needed to do. "Good morning," she said softly, trying to keep her voice calm. "Good morning," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "Are you ready?" Adana nodded, though her throat felt tight. "Yes, Kwame. I think it's time. I can't stay here any longer. Not because I don't care, but because it's the right thing for everyone, for you, for Zena, and for me." He walked closer and took a deep breath. "You've done so much for us," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "You brought life back into this house. You helped Zena smile when we thought the world had ended for her. I will always be grateful for that." Adana felt a tear slip down her cheek. She smiled through it. "Thank you, Kwame. That means more than I can say." Zena appeared at the doorway, rubbing her sleepy eyes. "Mama Ada?" she asked, her small voice sleepy but curious. "Yes, sweetheart," Adana said, kneeling down to hug her tightly. Zena clung to her, burying her tiny face in Adana's chest. "I'm going to visit your grandma," she whispered, "but I'll see you again soon." Zena pulled back just enough to look at her, eyes wide. "Promise?" Adana nodded. "I promise." She let go gently, standing and holding her bag close. Zena reached out one more time, and Adana took her hand for a brief moment. "Take care of Papa," she said softly. "I will," Zena whispered, her little hands curling around hers. Kwame came closer, placing a hand lightly on her shoulder. He didn't say much. Sometimes words are not enough. Instead he simply nodded and Adana understood. His eyes were full of gratitude, respect and a quiet sadness all at once. She held his gaze for a moment, feeling the weight of years, the laughter, the pain, the love and the memories, all converging into a single instant of understanding. She turned and stepped outside, the morning sun warming her face. The air was fresh, carrying the scents of the small town, baked bread, fresh flowers and the faint dust of the streets. She walked slowly, savoring the last glimpses of the home that had been so full of joy and sorrow. Every step was heavy yet freeing. She was leaving, but she was also reclaiming herself. The streets were waking up. Children ran to school, women carried baskets of fruit, and men walked toward their work. Adana moved among them quietly, unnoticed, yet feeling deeply connected to the life around her. The world was ordinary and bright, and yet it felt new, as if she were seeing it for the first time with her own eyes. After walking for a while, she reached her mother's house on the edge of the village. The small compound was surrounded by tall trees, their leaves rustling softly in the wind. Her mother came running out, worry and relief mixing on her face. "Adana, you're back." Adana smiled gently, tears still glistening in her eyes. "I'm home, Mama," she said, embracing her mother tightly. For the first time in years she felt the kind of comfort that only a home can bring, warm, safe and full of belonging. Her mother held her close, whispering softly, "I missed you, my child." "I missed this too," Adana replied, looking around. The walls, the garden, the soft light, everything reminded her of the peace she had been searching for. That night Adana stepped outside under the stars. The sky was vast and the cool wind brushed against her face. She sat on the porch, letting the quiet of the night settle over her. The world felt still, and in that stillness she finally felt the calm that had eluded her for so long. She held her hands together and whispered into the darkness, "I thought I wanted love, but what I needed was peace." A soft breeze moved through the trees, almost like a gentle sigh. She smiled, feeling as though Lorato's spirit was there watching over her. Not with anger, not with sadness, but with the quiet love of a sister. A love that had never left her, even in the hardest times. Adana leaned back, staring at the stars. For the first time she felt whole. She had made mistakes, she had hurt, and she had loved in ways that were complicated and painful. But now she understood something important. Life was not only about chasing love or filling empty spaces. It was about finding oneself, embracing peace and honoring the memories that shaped her. In that moment, under the endless night sky, Adana let go of the burdens she had carried for so long. She closed her eyes and felt the quiet joy of being free, free from regret, free from trying to be someone she was not, and free to simply be herself. The stars twinkled gently above and she smiled, her heart lighter than it had been in years. She knew that her journey was far from over, but for the first time she was ready to walk it on her own terms. And as the night settled around her, Adana whispered softly, "Thank you, Lorato. Thank you for watching over me. I am home now, and I am at peace." The wind carried her words into the still night, and the world seemed to hold its breath, honoring the quiet triumph of a heart that had finally found its way back to itself.